Now I want to introduce our guest speakers today. They've come from afar. First off, we have Heather Fossa. She came in from LA to be with us today. She is the Director of Sales for Research Now SSI. She made a big jump when she graduated from Utah State and decided to move to LA. She's been with that company for 5 years, and it has been through 2 acquisitions and a merger, putting Research Now SSI as the world's largest panel-based data provider. This is a real privilege to have her here, and she is good friends with Anne, who is also here. Anne flew in from Singapore. She is a business-minded creative storyteller. We're excited to hear about her experience with Netflix in particular. She started at Netflix 6 years ago. She's had 5 positions there, and now leads a team. She's the Director of Consumer and Brand Communications. She now leads a team whose mission is to create a lifestyle entertainment brand across the continent of Asia. So without anything else, we'll welcome them to the stage here.
Can you hear me?
Check it.
Check. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I'm actually going to do another introduction for Anne Wallin, because she's a pretty incredible person, and I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to introduce her to everyone here in the room. So for a little bit of context of who we are, Anne and I are both graduates of Utah State University, and we actually went to school at the same time here. We graduated in 2010, and we did know each other. We knew of each other, but we don't really consider ourselves friends. Like, we had similar friends in common, but we didn't hang out all that often. And as he mentioned, I moved to LA, and I was working at home and knew no one in the city, so I had no friends. And Anne moved to LA 6 months later. And randomly, I got a Facebook message from Anne, who I hadn't spoken to in probably 4 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And she said, "Hey, I'm thinking about moving down to LA. What do you think? And also, can you come help me look for apartments?" And
Which, when I think now that I live in LA, I don't know if anybody here is from LA, but Heather lives close to downtown, and I was looking for apartments in Santa Monica. Which, now living there for 4 years, I realized what a nice person she is, especially when we weren't friends. So
yeah, I drove like an hour and a half across the city to go help her find an apartment. But that was really important for me at that time, because I was in a point where I was just starting a new job. It was really stressful for me. I didn't have much of a network at all in the city. And Anne was sort of in a similar situation as well when she moved down there. And we became really close friends, because she became the person for me that, I would have a really stressful day in the office, and, maybe I was trying to navigate a difficult decision or a difficult conversation, and wanted some advice on how to go about that. And you'll see as we kind of go through today's conversation that Anne's an incredibly intelligent person, and she really was, for me, like a mentor through a very important time in my career. And then I think I for her as well, through that as well. So we became close through that point, and we're really excited to be here together with you guys today. So a little bit about Anne. She grew up in New Jersey, and she came to Utah State for college. Her first job in Utah was working at the DI here in Logan. And she has some ties to Cache Valley, so she's left a pretty strong legacy. She actually started, I don't know if anyone in this room went to any of the high schools here in the Valley, but if so, there are now girls lacrosse teams at all of those high schools, as I understand it.
I think so.
We'll
see how strong the legacy is. I don't know.
And Anne actually started all of those teams. She initiated kind of going into those high schools and coaching girls lacrosse when she was here at Utah State. Anne is not a graduate of the College of Business,
Sorry.
but she did graduate from the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. So, and then we'll talk a little bit about how she kind of shifted that focus to a more business mindset in her career. So that's a little bit more about Anne. And as we have been thinking about what we kind of want to talk about with you guys here today, one theme that has come up a lot as we've been meeting with students over the last few days here on campus is this idea of leadership and how, as Utah State students and graduates, we can go out and really impact the world for good. And so just to give a little context of where the conversation's going to head, we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to ask Anne some questions about her experience with leadership and how that plays out at her roles in Netflix and the culture there, because there's a really unique culture that I think that we can learn a lot from. Not only as an individual contributor as she started out her career there, but then also following that through in her path as towards management and managing a team, and how that same kind of theme of leadership transitions between both of those roles. So with that being said, I think I think in life, and that translates into companies as well, there can be a lot of barriers to having open and honest communication. So tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about how that plays out in terms of your experience in your career.
Yeah, so Heather kind of mentioned this, and if you haven't, I strongly suggest you guys kind of go find the Netflix Culture Deck. It's actually a pretty interesting, unique, and quite powerful document. But it really is kind of the thread between anything that happens at the company and how we think about leadership as a whole, and how has formed a lot of my own personal views in terms of my own interpretation of it. But a really key piece of it is this idea of transparency and candid feedback. So there's a strong, within my team, we have a very strong culture of having those hard conversations, sometimes easy, but most of the time hard conversations. It's like the candid conversations are harder when you're not seeing eye to eye, fully because it's the best thing for the work. So we're moving very quickly. We're doing lots of things. There are hundreds of balls in the air. Prioritization is very difficult, and through all of that, what's going to be the easiest way for us to be able to get things done, and that really is being able to communicate clearly. And if you have these times where, if you have these instances where you have teammates where you're both kind of need each other to be successful, but you aren't actually giving the whole story to the other person, it's going to constantly kind of cause these little hiccups and mini barriers in order for you to get to your end goal, and you'll get there slower. And so one of the things that I really try to drive, and my managers try to drive, is this idea of just be candid, be honest, make sure that you're giving people all the information. I've been at companies where information is kind of power, so it's like you hold on to it because that's how you can kind of get control. But in actuality, I've found that I've done my best work when that information gets shared equally across everyone, because everybody's already starting at the same place, and you're able to kind of fulfill your needs so much quicker and more efficiently. That I think in today's world, particularly where things are becoming much more global, much more multifaceted than ever before because of the internet, that speed is incredibly important.
And is there structure set up within the organization of providing like feedback, like a review system or?
So not in the traditional sense. So there's a lot of places where you'll have kind of a review session that's connected to probably your comp or how you're doing, and then you're then like things can come out of it in terms of performance, all that kind of stuff. And really, because in terms of how we think about how we think and how I think about the work, it's that need for feedback is actually more important in terms of just getting the work done as opposed to critiquing a human being. And so we do have a formal, if you will, session. We just came out of it actually, so I'm in a very reflective state right now. But what it is really is it's an open tool. You as a person working for the company can give feedback to everyone and anyone, no matter what their level is and no matter who they are. It's people who you work with on a regular basis or people who you've worked with on projects. And the idea is to give them constructive, actionable feedback that they can then take, find threads across the board, and then hopefully apply that into the coming year. And it can feel uncomfortable because your name's put to it, and sometimes we're not all perfect, and it's even if you know the things that you're not good at, it's always a little bit hard to read it sometimes. But the really important thing is that nothing in that tool is new information. So I'll constantly be even asking my team, because I do think that even in a culture like Netflix where it's wanted and warranted for you to give feedback to your manager or people above you, there's still a trepidation there. And so I've kind of gotten into the habit of asking and seeking it out. So after a project, what could I have done better? How are you guys feeling about things? Is this meeting working? And kind of creating that environment that people feel that they can give it, because
So you're not surprised at the end.
right.
Of the
And I mean,
year
sometimes
or
there are things, and I'll be honest, there was something in mind this year from a peer that I was like, huh, interesting. But you meet up after and you have a conversation and you seek to understand and figure out where it comes from, and then you take that and move on. And I think it is disarming and it is uncomfortable, but I mean, I've been doing it for over 6 years now, but it doesn't get easier. I think it just, no, it gets easier, but I think it is just as powerful as it was in the beginning.
And I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but can you think of like a piece of feedback that you received at any point throughout your career that kind of helped you grow, become better, or change a behavior?
Yeah, so I get this one, I still get it. So that's the other thing too, is there's also threads that you're like, oh, yep, that's me. I get feedback about tone without fail all the time, where either I'm too, I kind of had an epiphany last 2 weeks ago of because I've been thinking a lot about it, and what I kind of deduce it down to is I am tragically concise. So I will say the thing that is the shortest way to say it, and I might be completely positive, and it might be something that isn't negative. It's something that I actually celebrate, but because I say it so concisely and sometimes in 5 words, maybe I should use 8, it can come off a little bit disarming. And so it's something that I've always kind of worked through, and it still pops up here and there. But I think in terms of development and how that's helped me after hearing that from many different people, both people I manage, but people I work with, managers even, is this idea of asking more questions. So I get into, there's also a reactive piece of that too, where someone will ask me a question, I'll just answer it. Because I am quite sure a lot of the time. I don't lack surety in myself. So, but what I have started doing is asking follow-up questions. So depending on what it is, being like, oh, what do you mean by that? Or can you give me a little bit more information here? And kind of digging a little bit deeper to really understand probably the crux of what the person wants to know, and then come into it with an answer, which has helped.
Great. I think it can be difficult sometimes to receive that feedback, but or feedback that you might perceive as negative, but it's how you take that feedback and implement it, and it's really, people are giving it to help you improve.
Yeah, I think too, like the most powerful feedback I've ever gotten is usually people who I manage. So the tone one most recently came in like January from one of the people that works for me. And it was somebody who knows me really, really well. So I am very grateful for the personality I have, because I get along with like 99% of people, and people just assume that I mean very, very well. So sometimes I think I do get away with saying things that other people might be like, oh, okay. And so when it came from this person who knows me incredibly well and assumes all of the good intent, and she even said, she goes, I know you don't mean it, but you should know that when you say it X, Y, Z, this is how it's interpreted. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was for some reason that time is when it crystallized and clicked.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good example of giving feedback to people who you might be a little bit uncomfortable with.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, you work at Netflix, and I think that it's a really unique culture there. Not every company has this environment of encouraging open and honest communication, and I think ultimately to their detriment. I mean, I've seen situations where people haven't been happy with their where they're at and where they're headed, and they want a promotion, but no one's told them what they need to do to get that promotion, and that can be really frustrating over time. But so with that being said, do you have any advice for people who may be going into an organization or a company that doesn't kind of foster this same level of open and honest communication, and how they can implement that in their day-to-day interactions?
Yeah, I think, not every company is like that, right? And I have to be honest, it's not perfect. So there's also, but fundamentally where I work, it is celebrated. But I have worked at places where it isn't as open. It isn't, you do more of what your manager tells you. And there's more mandates. There's more kind of, not secrecy, but just a little bit less appreciation for kind of showing all your cards. And I think that the trick in those situations is, even if the people around you or you're in an environment where not everyone is being fully honest or fully transparent, the thing that's always helped me in those situations is still making sure that what I am with one person is the same thing with every single person. So you create an environment around you where straightforwardness and transparency is like how you operate, and people naturally kind of fall into that. And I think they're also within that, you create kind of this environment of safety in a way. I know that kind of sounds a little bit maybe dramatic, but it's this idea that you can build trust with people and be able to kind of make your own like little mini culture of what you think will help you kind of do your best work and help you navigate throughout it all. And you have to be careful because not everyone is always. You may not feel like everyone's there for the same reasons or the business goals, and it might feel a little bit negative. But I think that if you try to exude those attributes, it's hard for even people who kind of maybe want to kind of be a little bit sneaky to combat that too much, because it's pretty obvious that clash is there.
Yeah. And I think you've articulated well why all the benefits of why it's important to have this kind of communication as you're trying to build something together as a team. But what about if you're having to have, what if you messed up on something and you're having to have a really difficult conversation with your boss about that? Like, how does that play out, and do you have any examples from your experience of what that looked like?
So we had a film that we were promoting a couple years ago, even 2 years ago. I have more recent examples, but this is the one that just popped in my head. So that was a little bit it was questionable in terms of how we were promoting it and how we could talk about it, just because of the messaging around how we needed to market the film. And I was very nervous, because when you work with anybody, it's a partnership, right? And people can buy into it. It's kind of like a contract, and that's a contract, and people can buy into it or they cannot. And you can't fully, as a publicist, as somebody who has experience working with spokespeople, you can prep people as much as you can. But there's an element that once they get into an interview, or once they get on the record, that they have the freedom to say what they want. And I was working with one specific person that I was really nervous about where they were going to take the conversation and how they were going to kind of create the narrative that we wanted to avoid. And I remember talking to the head of our department, and I was so nervous. It was one of those things where I was like, if this goes poorly, I could get let go. Like I was a little bit in my head, but I was very nervous and a little bit stressed out about it. And I called them to be like, hey, I just need you to know this is the situation and this was what might happen. I'm taking responsibility, but I just don't want any surprises. And he was like, what's the worst that could happen? He goes, we have a really terrible news cycle for 24 hours. And I'm like, yeah, that seems like a really terrible thing. And he's like, no. He was like, it's fine, we'll make it through, don't worry. And I think that what he instilled was this idea that you can make mistakes and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think that one's more of a reputation, which that can cost a ton of money if you tarnish the reputation of a company. But in terms of like actual project, I did this huge press and influencer thing. It cost quite a bit of money in one of our markets that was more in just autopilot. I didn't really, it was like, this is the thing we always do when we launch a country. And I just did it and it was fine. Like it worked out. The press was good. Like everything we wanted to happen happened. But in actuality, when you look the day of, I remember being like, why are we doing this? Why are we here? This is the wrong time, the wrong place to be doing it. But it's too late at that point. You got 200 journalists in the room next door. So that was one of those times where I remember coming out having a really hard conversation with my boss, being like, I completely messed up. But again, there was that environment of like, what did you learn? How are you going to apply it next time? And how are you going to not do that again, right? And making it learning moments as opposed to like where like it could feel like chastisement.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think also like we've been in different sessions while we're here, and a topic that has been popping up as I've been speaking with students is looking for organizations that kind of align with you in terms of your culture and things that are important to you in the life that you want to live. And so Netflix, through these stories, like they do tend to value the idea of risk, taking risks, supporting, they hire the best people and then trust them to do their job well. Correct me if I'm saying that, if I'm reading into that too much.
I would like to think so.
But I think even outside of that environment, you can build up the trust and credibility within any organization so that your leaders have your back in similar types of situations, even if that isn't kind of a core something that they outwardly state. And I've experienced several circumstances within my career as well. You don't get it on day one when you enter the company all the time, but it's certainly something that as you prove yourself over and over again, you do then have an ability to kind of stand your ground and say, we're going to take this risk and people will have your back. So.
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, like the best leaders and mentors or people I've worked with, and I think Heather mentioned it in her intro 2.0, that we were kind of each other's mentors at one point as well, and still are, but like I've never worked for her and she's never worked for me, and most likely that will never happen because we're in different industries. But so that leadership can come from all over, and I think the key to it is how do you create an environment that allows for people to feel empowered and feel ownership, and that at the end of the day, if someone feels ownership, for me personally, and when I own something, I want to make sure that I'm killing it and doing great work because your name's on it. And there's a level of just, I don't know, for me, excitement and a little bit of stress probably in that. And so how do you create it so that people, even if we're in a place where being candid is not okay, you still are able to find those roads and find those people who will back you to help you kind of move and progress, both from a development standpoint, but just from a project standpoint.
Yeah, that's good. Let's ask one more question about risk before we move on, but how important is risk to the success of a team and results that you guys are able to achieve together? And if you have any specific examples, that'd be...
I think it's really important. I think if you look at companies, and we talked about Ford this morning, so we're going to use Ford from like when they first invented the automobile too. I think that counts. It's easy to look at everything now because we're like, oh my gosh, look at all this technology and this innovation. But I think innovation's been happening forever, right? And in every single instance, it's always been because someone made a bold choice to do the thing that probably wasn't the smart thing at the time, but they could see that if they're right, they're going to be really, really right. And the only way you're really ever going to drive innovation on a big creating a business and changing industries level down to figuring out a more efficient way to create an accounting tool, like that's just as innovative and important as well, is if you're willing to kind of sacrifice to a degree what you know is effective and makes success for the things that are a little bit in the unknown. And that's where the risk comes in. If you're always kind of like, oh, it might be too risky. Some things are too risky, right? Like you gotta be calculated about it, but I do think that that element of risk and letting employees, letting people know, and even just students as you guys are in classes, letting everyone know that it's okay. It's okay to kind of mess up every now and then because those mess ups are actually just going to make your success even better.
So you've worked with, we talked a little bit about this, but Anne lives in Singapore now.
I do.
And she leads the Asia team for global communications.
Brand communications, yeah.
Brand communications. So you've worked with global teams.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how your unique experience and background as a Utah State student, as a woman, as you know, from New Jersey, et cetera, has impacted your experience and has really helped you build excellence within your role.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I don't really have a New Jersey accent now, but I used to. But there are some words I say, and what I've discovered is anybody outside America doesn't know the difference between a Southern accent and New Jersey accent, which shocks me, in all honesty. But I've worked, so as Heather said, I've worked across EMEA, I've even worked in Latin America, and then obviously in the last 3 years, I've transitioned to our Asia business. And I think one of the things that is really powerful is that we're innately all the same. Like, really at the end of the day, we're all driving to do great work and be great and want to be good people in society, right? But how the dressings of it all in terms of how you might operate or where, like culturally, where you might come from is a little bit different and having to navigate through that. And I even think that's the case when you're just in one market. If you're working just in the U.S. and you're working with all American colleagues, it's that similar thing. And I think that's where that, you even mentioning like me as a woman being in a predominantly male corporate world. And I disclaim this as like, I'm speaking from my own perspective as my identity, but I think that it's interchangeable with whatever it is that you come from in your background and the piece that you think is a little bit different than probably the group that you're in or the community or where you're working. So please think of that while I'm saying this, but it does affect how you work with others, how you think about your interactions. And the one thing that I think I've learned is to the nth degree that the importance of assuming good intent from others is incredibly powerful in how you can operate and be more effective, and also demanding that from the people that you're working with. So if something happens that you're like, oh, I feel that might be a little bit discriminatory to me, like trying to dig into it and not let it falter, but also as somebody that might be sitting next to that person, being willing to speak up and kind of help be an ally. And I think there's lots of movements going on right now in terms of women in entertainment specifically as the industry I'm in, or just in lots of industries. And really I think the key is the piece of assuming good intent from the person that you probably feel wronged you, but also demanding that from them for you, and then also helping kind of be that ally with people can really kind of, and being bold can really help kind of mitigate a lot of situations. And it's uncomfortable and it's tricky and it's a hard topic, but I think it's incredibly important. I think the word diversity, I think, is a little bit of a buzzword, rightly so, 100%. But I think my experience in terms of being at a company that had all of its employees in California, in San Francisco and Los Angeles, to moving to a company that has a few different offices in the U.S., Sao Paulo, Europe, now Asia. You've got a lot more people from a lot more different backgrounds, and this idea of diversity turns into, well, what is diversity if people don't feel comfortable? And what's the role of inclusion in all of that? So I truly believe that diversity by itself is checking a box, but diversity where you're creating an environment of inclusion where people feel comfortable, and I'm going to use the word safe again, but feel like their word is just as important as others, I think is where that buzzword becomes something that's actually actionable and then also ownable and responsible to everybody in the team or in your class or peer circle or whatever it might be.
And also encouraging those who may be less comfortable of kind of voicing their opinion as well.
So so when I moved to Asia about over 2.5 years ago, is when I moved from being an individual contributor to hiring and managing a team. And the things that make you successful as an individual contributor are not necessarily the things that make you successful as a people manager. You kind of have to let go of the work, let go of the day-to-day, and yeah, you're really good at it and that's what's fun, but your job is now to kind of manage people and create the why for why people want to do the work that you're doing, which is a little bit of a different skill set, and also a steep learning curve. And when I moved over to Asia and the office started building really quickly, I found myself in situations where I would be in meetings where particularly the younger, more junior folks who I know are whip smart weren't making, they were being quiet in meetings. And I'm like, oh, that girl's got an opinion or that guy's got an opinion. I could feel it. And at first I kind of didn't know what to do. And then I just kind of leaned into it. And I just would either G-chat, because we use Google, I would G-chat the person and be like, do you have something to say? If you do, say it. And no, I more did that with the people that I directly managed because I felt like I had more liberal, it was more liberal for me to do that. But even people who I managed, but outside of that, I would just kind of watch the room and see who I could tell wanted to say anything, and I would just call it out and I'd say their name. I'd be like, did you want to say something? And then over time, it created an environment where in these meetings, people felt comfortable to be able to collaborate and really drive great conversation. And then the conversation stopped being one between two heads of orgs, and it started being a conversation across a lot of different people with a lot of different perspectives, and a lot of the people who are doing the actual day-to-day work. Yeah. And it completely shifted it's shifted the dynamic of our teams, and for the better. I think our work's better because of it.
So we're about out of time, I think. I want to follow up with that last question because I think it kind of pulls everything together in terms of your experience. So Anne and I think we're a somewhat unique kind of guest for this type of forum in that we graduated from Utah State 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And obviously Anne's accomplished really incredible things in that time, and I'm also proud of what I've been able to accomplish as well, through our support of each other and what we've driven towards. But before we kind of close out and see if there's time for questions or if anyone has any questions, is there any advice that you could give students sitting in the room today as they're thinking about the next phase of their lives?
Yeah. So I think, this has come up a few times in different ways, and I think I've finally figured out how to crystallize it. But I think it's not necessarily something I didn't know when I was a freshman coming into Utah State, but I think it's something that's crystallized over time in terms of probably what I was seeking for and what I was understanding in terms of leadership. And I think it's this idea that there is no right way to lead, and for every single person, there's a different there's a different tone, there's a different, just different way of creating cause and creating helping gallivant, kind of helping bring people along. And I've been doing a lot of readings in the last 2 months of like just a lot of different philosophers and folks. And one of the things, like I think about like Martin Luther King, who is very, he was very strong, but it was understated and subtle, and he was able to lead a really important cause at a really important time, and he wasn't in your face, and he was nonviolent and all these things. And then you have somebody like Margaret Thatcher, who is known as the Iron Lady, and strong, and probably the most quintessential like leader you could think of in terms of just like front and center. And then you have somebody like Lao Tzu, who is the father of Taoism, if you didn't know that. And he said that the best leader is the leader who is not seen. And to me, those are three very drastically different ways of driving change and driving cause. And yet all of them are iconic and have created movements in their own worlds that still impact today, for better or for worse. We can debate that after, but I think the thread with all of it is that ability to create empowerment for people and a belief in a cause that can help you just kind of find a place in society, which is a little bit of like business, but also just like somebody this morning was talking about like wanting to do business because just wanting to do good business and ethical business, and I think that's a really key piece of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would say.
Well, good.
All right, we're going to move into our question and answer portion. Just as a disclaimer, Anne said she's very excited to talk about TV, so you can ask anything about that.
It's true.
But thank you, Heather and Anne. Anyone have a question, please stand up and state your name and major.
Hello, Anne. My name is Mitchell
Hi.
Casey. I'm currently exploring business administration. So I'm very excited to ask this question because I myself am from New Jersey. And I'm
What part?
South Jersey,
I'm
Medford. This is how it is. We're really direct people, all right? And I understand that. And coming out here, it's a kind of a different culture.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to talk about Jersey attitude and how did you adapt when you were going to all these new places? What did you use with your Jersey attitude to make you more successful in your environment? Because it's a very different culture compared to a lot of other places. It's a fun question to debate. So I'll leave it at that.
When I moved here, I had culture shock for sure. And I actually, when I've moved anywhere, LA too, I think every place is different. You're right. And New Jersey has a unique culture in and of itself. One of the things I did mute my accent out so that nobody notices it unless I say water. But I think to me, it's like being assertive has helped me in terms of being able to get to the places that I want to go and do the things I want to do. And I never want to lose that piece of it, but I think the approach of just kind of like being in somebody's face, not that I was ever like that, but there's a way to be assertive without kind of being over and negative. And I think there's a thin line, right, where you're like, I'm just going to do whatever I want. But it's also, no, I'm going to do what I want, but I want to bring you with me. And so I think the key is how do you, even if you know what your end goal is or where you think you should end up, like how do you bring and rally the people around you? So like you channel that, we'll call it Jersey attitude, in a way that is galvanizing and getting people to come along as opposed to turning anybody off and being like, get a load of this chick kind of thing.
Hi, my name's Jolie Gould, and I'm a marketing and business administration major. I just wanted to ask how being an expatriate has affected your leadership style, especially in Asia, where typically the power distance is a lot higher, and Netflix has such a culture of open communication, which is usually associated with a low power distance.
So, absolutely true. In addition to that, I think entertainment also is similar, where it's quite hierarchical and there's a route that you go up. So I think, and then you've also got finance. There's lots of different facets of like these really strong kind of structured statues that you have to climb up to be successful. So it's hard for people in lots of different ways. Like I think for America, so like in America, the Netflix culture is really difficult, and then when you start getting outside into Europe and Asia and even Latin America, it can be even more jarring. But I think when I was talking to a recruiter right before I moved to Asia, and it was when I was starting to get ready to hire people, and I said something I asked her a question that was, if we're looking at companies that don't have a similar culture to us, and we don't see the track record of people being successful and operating in an environment like this one, how do you find people? And she's like, you know what? She's like, what it is she's like, you find the people who have the essence of it, and you can tell that if they were put into that environment, they would be able to do 10x what they've been doing in their successful career anyway. And that stuck strongly with me, where it's like, nobody comes into Netflix being able to just be the way that you need to be and operate. It's a learning curve the whole time. And I think it's the same thing when you're going into international territories as well, as it's finding those people who have the opportunity, that would just flourish and thrive if given the opportunity. And I think the other piece too is the Singapore office is we represent about 21, I think, nationalities across the world in that office. So it's very, very diverse. And it's also growing very quickly. So like we've had like majority of the office is new within the last year, which when you especially have a strong culture like Netflix, that can be really hard to kind of keep going in a strong, effective way. But what's been really awesome to watch is how the ownership and responsibility of how the teams operate is wholly on everyone, and how people use each other and work together in terms of trying to work through hard problems, or, oh, I'm really uncomfortable in this conversation, how should I kind of help me strategize, has been really great to see in a way that I've never seen at Netflix. Because what would happen in LA is we'd have a new hire and they'd be surrounded by like 20 people who have been there for at least a year, right? And we're in a situation where everyone's new, so everyone's figuring it out. But at the same time, everyone feels that same ownership over it to create it and create an environment that they want to work in and that they can be effective.
Hi, my name's Dennis. I just have a simple question. I was wondering, do you consider it important to develop professional skills in your free time? And what has helped you sort of cultivate discipline or the willingness to do those things?
When you say free time, do you mean like
Away
classes,
from,
masters, that kind of stuff? Like formal or just even
informal,
Okay.
let's say.
Yeah, I don't read. Heather reads business books.
No, I listen to business books on Audible during my commute. It's
don't.
different.
I don't.
I get this.
I don't. But I do read a lot, and I obviously watch a lot of TV and movies too. But I think that making sure that I'm taking time outside of like my day-to-day Netflix work is incredibly important in terms of how effective I am at that work. Most recently, a couple weeks ago, I was at a kind of a leadership retreat where we didn't even talk about Netflix. It was like philosophy and theory and a discussion around that. And I walked out of that week and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like I have so many ideas, but it's less of like ideas that are directly applicable, but in just terms of how to think about things and different perspectives. So I do think it's incredibly important to have that. I have no plans on like any formal going to classes, but like I do think, and Heather said this yesterday, I really liked it, where it was all these different ways that we live in a world where museum and art access, or taking a ceramics class, or watching a film from Brazil that you never would have, or reading a book of poems by like an Indian poet. You know, like you have so much access to such interesting creativity from people all over that it would be such a loss not to kind of think that there was stuff to learn in all of that to make you better.
And I would, if I may add,
You can.
I think you also, without describing it formally, like you're a mentor to me, and that's a professional development thing that you're working on, and me vice versa. Like, you know, we get together as friends, but we're talking about things that are similar, that we've experienced, that we can help guide each other through. And for me, as I talk to you about those kinds of things, those are things that I then take back to the workplace that I can share with the team that I manage there. And similarly, like with Anna and I being here on campus, this is something that, you know, talking with students is personally rewarding. It's a way for us to give back a little bit to a great university, but also, you know, it's a professional development as well in terms of thinking through problems and reflecting on experience and refocusing on, you know, what you're trying to build with your team back in the office. So I think there are different ways, even if they're not formally defined as, you know, my goal is to be a better public speaker, so therefore I am going to go, you know, speak with students on campus, or, you know, whatever that looks like. It doesn't need to be so formally defined, but you'll find value in just reaching higher and expanding and sharing your talents with others as well, and that really crosses over into your professional life.
Great, we have time for one more question.
So my name is Ashton. I'm studying international business. This is actually a question for both of you. So we've talked a lot about leading a team and helping them understand why, as well as, you know, being transparent and open lines of communication. For the both of you, what would you say are the keys of success that you've seen to thrive in a global market or international market and even the national market?
Adaptability and ability to nimbleness to pivot, I think, is incredibly important. If I think about just my own industry, I mean, I started at Netflix over 6 years ago, right after Quickster, so which was a little bit of a debacle. You can look it up. And back then, people didn't want streaming, trying to pitch streaming, like what to watch, like kind of like we see like the movie listings. We're trying to do that. It was like, what, nobody stream, it was not mainstream. And now today, like everybody's watching everything. They've got Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix, FX has an app now, CBS has an app. Everybody has these, everyone's going towards this route, and it's like, well, I can't believe nobody wanted to write about it, right? Like the fact that that can happen in 6 years, that's really fast. And so I think there's like in that kind of environment, the ability to be able to let go and move on and be effective still is really, really important.
I agree with that, and I'll add to it that I'm going to drop another business buzzword, but the idea of just having grit and kind of regardless of what happens in an organization. So my history with SSI is that I joined in a period where they were very focused on growth, and it was through mergers and acquisitions. So and so through that period, we've similarly, you know, transitioned multiple times in terms of, you know, how we're integrating teams, what our products and services look like, how we're going to market with those. And so part of it is pivoting and being flexible and just refocusing and making sure that you're aligned with the company objective and separating what your own personal objective is from that. And by that I mean, like, you know, I've spent a year working on focusing on building something that I'm really proud of, and then I've had an experience where the company said, okay, forget about that, it doesn't matter anymore. Now you're working on this. So being able to pivot, and then also not letting the frustration of having to let that go get to you, and just having the grit to keep working even if, you know, things don't turn out how you expected them to, or wanted them to.
I would even say it's like bias to action, like the ability to just like go and do.
Yeah.
And ask questions for sure, but just like to kind of just get down and dirty a little bit.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.